The crowd buzzed with restless energy in the packed auditorium, electric lights sweeping across faces full of anticipation. It was another night on America's Got Talent, but this would not be just another audition. As thousands of viewers watched from home, no one knew that tonight's performance would go down in AGT history, a moment so powerful that even Simon Cowell, the notoriously hard-to-impress judge, would be moved to hit the golden buzzer in utter shock. Backstage, the tension was palpable. Two young men, brothers by bond though not by blood, paced in a narrow prep room, clutching an old notebook filled with scribbled lyrics and faded dreams. One was named Luis, tall with soulful brown eyes that carried both hope and hardship. His guitar, worn from years on the road and countless performances in open markets and city corners, leaned against his leg like a trusted companion. The other was Marco, a wiry young man with a ready smile but a quiet, brooding intensity. He wore a battered fedora pulled low over his brow, not for style, but because it had once belonged to his father, who had died before Marco could fully understand what it meant to lose someone. Together, these two, known in the small circles where they performed simply as Luis and Marco, had traveled thousands of miles from their home in the Philippines to chase a dream they barely knew how to articulate, the dream of singing on a stage big enough to make their families proud, and maybe, just maybe, rewriting their own destinies in the process. They had scraped together every cent they could, performing in street corners, church gatherings, wedding receptions, even on ferry terminals where commuters tossed change without ever stopping to listen. Somehow, through all of it, they managed to survive. Not comfortably, not without pain, but they survived together. Tonight was their chance. They had made it through the lengthy auditions, from the judges' pre-selection round to the preliminary performances. And now, after days of waiting, they sat with their hearts thundering, listening to the PA system announce the next act. Up next, Luis and Marco. Marco's hand tightened around Luis's shoulder. Their eyes met, a moment of acknowledgement, of unspoken gratitude. They walked on stage into a deafening applause that seemed unreal to them both. The bright lights blinded them momentarily, then the familiar faces of the judges came into focus, Sophia, Howie, and Heidi all smiling encouragingly. Simon was, as always, unreadable. Luis cleared his throat and caught Marco's eye again. Then something shifted. No more fear, no more doubt. Just a deep, grounding resolve. Marco nodded once, and then they began. What came out of their mouths wasn't just a song, it was a piece of their souls. Their chosen piece was an original composition, a song they'd written on a rainy night in a cramped hostel back in Manila, fueled by longing, loss, and a love for music that neither hunger nor hardship had ever extinguished. The melody was simple at first, just a guitar and two voices. But as they sang, it grew into something transcendent. Luis's voice carried warmth and grit, while Marco's harmonies soared like wind against the storm. They sang of waking before dawn, of laying bricks under a scorching sun, of laughing at nothing and crying for everything they had lost and everything they hoped for. They sang not for fame, not for applause, but for truth. The room quieted, as if the world itself paused to listen. Hearts fluttered, eyes glistened. Even the judges, seasoned veterans of emotion-packed performances, were visibly moved. By the end of the song, the auditorium was silent. No claps, no cheers, just stillness, an awe so complete it took several seconds before the crowd erupted. And then they did. Thunderous cheers, shouts, whistles, cheers, phones raised high. Marco looked at Luis with disbelief, and then, from the corner of his eye, he saw something that made his jaw drop. Simon Cowell, the famously critical judge known more for cutting acts down than lifting them up, stood from his seat. He pointed at the golden buzzer. Then he walked toward it. Gasps echoed throughout the theater. Sophia gasped. Howie's eyes widened. Heidi clapped her hands in astonishment. Simon's voice came, steady but powerful, cutting through the cheering crowd with clarity that stunned everyone. That was the most heartfelt performance we have had all season. Then, without another word, he hit the golden buzzer. The entire stage lit up in golden confetti. Fireworks flared. The crowd stood, roaring. Luis and Marco, two poor boys from humble beginnings, were propelled straight to the AGT Live Finals. Tears streamed down their faces. For a moment, they couldn't speak. They just stood there, arms around each other, letting the overwhelming exhilaration wash over them. This was their moment, their song, their victory, the journey that brought them here. They hadn't always dreamed of big stages and global recognition. Luis had grown up in a tiny coastal village in the Philippines. His earliest memories were of salt tang clouds in the air, wooden fishing boats swaying with the tides, and the distant hum of radio ballads blending with the crashing waves. His mother sang while cooking rice. His father hummed while tying nets. Music was life. Not something to chase, but something that simply existed. Marco wasn't from the same village. He grew up in a crowded city with people who didn't know how to stop moving long enough to breathe. His father was a musician too, a jazz player whose saxophone once mesmerized crowds in smoky bars. But addiction took him early. Marco's mother left when he was small. His father tried to hold everything together, yet illness stole him before Marco was old enough to say goodbye. When Luis and Marco met in a bustling Manila market, they didn't immediately click. Two different worlds, two different personalities. But when Marco heard Luis sing, and the timbre of his voice hit him like a wave, something shifted. Marco nervously hummed along, adding harmonies that surprised even himself. A crowd gathered, coins dropped in their hat. That was the beginning. They began performing as a duo, improvising songs, blending styles, folk, pop, ballad, a bit of jazz, a bit of soul, anything that had heart. It didn't matter what genre it was, their music had feeling. But as time passed, survival became harder. Jobs were scarce. Days blurred into nights of uncertainty. They slept on benches, in bus stations, sometimes even on rooftops if rain chased them from the streets. But every hardship strengthened their bond, and every song sharpened their purpose. Then came a time when someone mentioned America's Got Talent. A dream that sounded distant, almost fantastical. Why not? They thought. What did they have to lose? It took months to save enough for a one-way ticket. They practiced relentlessly, sometimes until their voices cracked, writing songs, refining harmonies, learning how to transcend language with emotion. Their families watched with nervous smiles. Some doubted, some prayed, but none of them expected that this journey would carry the weight it did, not even Luis and Marco. The roar of the crowd still echoed in their ears as they were whisked backstage. The confetti still fluttered through the air like golden snow. Marco wiped his face, tears glistening in his eyes. Did that really just happen? He whispered. Luis smiled but didn't answer at first. His voice was thick with emotion. We did it, but I think we just left a piece of our hearts out there. Marco nodded. Everyone felt it, not just heard us, felt us. And they were right. From judges to audience members, from families watching in living rooms to fans watching around the world, the emotional impact of their performance rippled far beyond the stage. Simon Cowell, who had been notoriously skeptical during auditions, walked toward them. His expression was calm, almost composed, but his eyes revealed something deeper. You too, he said slowly, you are rare. There are performers with technical skill, and there are performers with soul. You have the latter. You made us feel something real, something unforgettable. Luis and Marco stood speechless. Simon Cowell rarely offered praise, let alone generous praise. But that night, he had done more than praise them. He had honored them with one of the highest compliments he had given in years. Within minutes of that performance going viral, social media exploded. Clips of the two brothers singing spread like wildfire. Commentators, fans, musicians, and celebrities shared the video. Some said it was the most powerful audition in AGT history. Others said it was proof that music could transcend language, culture, and circumstance. People from the Philippines and around the world rallied behind Luis and Marco. Messages poured in. Prayers, congratulations, stories from people who'd overcome hardship themselves. A music producer from Los Angeles offered to collaborate with them. A Filipino singer posted a heartfelt message of support, saying their voices had reached places no words could. The energy was overwhelming, but through all the congratulations and offers, both brothers remained grounded. Their focus wasn't fame, it was connection. Their song, a universal message. The song they performed wasn't just notes and lyrics. It was a tapestry woven from struggles against poverty and scarcity, dreams that refused to die, the resilience of youth, the power of hope, The beauty that emerges when pain is transformed into art. And that was its magic. People didn't just hear the song, they felt it. They felt it in their hearts. In their memories. In places that no language barrier could ever block. And that's why Simon Cowell didn't just hit the golden buzzer, he was moved to. Looking ahead, a future rewritten. In the days following the performance, the brothers gave interviews, signed with professionals, and began preparing for the live finals. Everyone asked what they would sing next, and they hinted that their next piece would be an original too, perhaps even more powerful than the first. But one thing was certain. No matter what happened in the finals, they had already succeeded. Not because of fame or applause, but because they had touched hearts, across continents, across cultures, across oceans. And in doing so, they proved something: the world. Music doesn't just entertain, it unites, it heals. It speaks truths that words alone can't express. Epilogue. A song that changed everything. On a quiet night, long after the spotlight had dimmed for the evening, Luis and Marco sat on a rooftop overlooking the city skyline. Marco strummed the old guitar softly. Luis hummed a quiet melody, the same song that had launched them into the history books of America's Got Talent. Neither spoke at first. There wasn't anything left to say. Instead, they listened. Not to applause, not to cheers, but to the quiet, deep echo of a dream that was no longer distant. The world had heard their song. And the world had responded with love. Marco finally spoke. Do you think people will remember this, the song? Luis looked at the sky, stars shimmering like distant hopes. I think they already have, he said with a soft smile. And somewhere in that stillness, the music lingered, unforgettable, unbroken, and forever their own.